And as hard as getting new gun legislation passed through Congress would be, changing the Constitution would be an even more monumental task. And here to talk about this with us today is Seth Masket, the director of the Center on American Politics at the University of Denver. Thank you so much for coming in here to talk about this. This is a meaty subject. So what do you think Justice Stevens was efforting here?
You know, there's a couple of ways of looking at it. Maybe he was just very sincerely saying that the only way we're going to get serious changes in our gun laws is to actually just get rid of the Second Amendment or fundamentally change the Second Amendment. He's got to realize how monumental a task that would be, though. I mean, that would be a great challenge. It's hard to imagine that actually occurring. Or he could be just saying that, you know, this may be kind of an extreme idea, but what we need is, in some way, mainstream established people making those extreme ideas to make more moderate ideas sound even more acceptable.
Okay, and let me just ask a basic question. How would you go about changing the Constitution?
I mean, we have a way to amend the Constitution. It requires 2/3 of both chambers of Congress have to pass it, and then 3/4 of all the state legislatures would have to pass that. Considering widespread support for handgun ownership, and you know, you'd have to get 3/4 of all the states to sign off on that, it's hard to imagine that occurring anytime soon.
Well, you heard Dudley Brown say this would start a civil war. I don't think he's wrong, right? I mean, given what we have seen on both sides of this issue?
I mean, there would be very substantial pushback to any effort to do that, but the chances are it wouldn't even get anywhere past the first step. I mean, it's hard to imagine any sort of repeal like that even getting a majority of support in the Congress, no less 2/3 support.
We just heard Justice Stevens call the Second Amendment a relic. Do you think that that's accurate?
Well, it obviously, I mean, it has the language of an earlier time period. I mean, considering that, you know, it opens with the phrase, a well-regulated militia. I mean, this is not really something that's necessarily pertinent to our daily lives today, and that part of it is regularly ignored in a lot of discussion. But clearly that was the context the founders were talking about, is the idea of maintaining a militia, making sure that, that the American nation was safe and that liberties would be protected that way. Today that's been more or less interpreted as enabling an individual right to gun ownership, although still the language of well-regulated and militia is in that text.
So what do you think the bigger issue is here with this gun issue, with the discussion of even considering repealing, not that anyone is seriously considering repealing the Second Amendment, but what do you think the bigger issue is right now in our culture?
Well, we have a larger issue in that we really have been having a rash of these mass shootings over the last several years, whether in schools or in other public places. And people are looking for a solution to that sort of thing. And the NRA, among other groups, is very resistant to really any kind of legislative solution to that. They're basically saying any tinkering with gun rights or anything like that, any sort of regulation of gun ownership is seen as some sort of an affront, some sort of an attack on the Second Amendment, even if it would be consistent legally with the Second Amendment. They're saying politically it's unacceptable. And so you have increasingly one side getting more motivated and saying we need a solution to this ongoing problem, and the other side saying there basically are no solutions.
Do you think there will be some solutions or some resolution at some point?
Well, one of the things that we've seen in recent years after these shootings is that there's usually some sort of public outrage that dies out very quickly. The national attention turns very quickly to another subject, and with that, you know, and the chances for reform generally die pretty quickly. The Parkland shooting has been different. The students who've been organizing a lot of the protests since then and has really developed into some sort of a national movement. I'd say the chances for some sort of serious reform, either at the federal level or at the level of various states, is much more possible now than anything we've seen in recent years.
It certainly has been interesting to watch these students stand up and speak for themselves and fight like we have never seen before.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to go back probably to the 1960s or 70s to see a time when so many young people have been organizing so many protests and, you know, really been on the ball in this way.
All right, Seth Masket, thank you for that insight.